Welcome everyone to Season 7, Episode 4 of the Dining Table. This one is the DeFi credit score. So we're going to mix up the format a bit and kick it off with what's going on in credit land. So Hugh, over to you.
Amazing, thanks Kerman. So I'll just give a quick development update for the last 2 weeks, talk about what's coming down the pipe, and then we've got a segment where Stuart is going to kind of talk about some of the bits and pieces of the credit score in some detail. So I'm going to try my best to do justice to the work of the team. So really like the focus of the whole credit team for the last 2 weeks has been preparing for our beta release. We've spent a whole load of time writing user documentation. This is, I would say, like, essentially complete, but for potential feedback from our advisors. We're circulating that this week, and we're hopefully going to get some good feedback that might change it. But yeah, we're really happy with how it's ended up so far. And then on the development side, we've spent some time basically just like building out the homepage and the action modal. So this stuff is like the first round of development's complete. It's now been gone through like a first round of design quality assurance, and yeah, the team are going to continue to progress that. The goal is to have that one done by this week is kind of the focus. It's QA iteration, which is good. And then we're hopefully going to be in a spot for by the end of this week, if not maybe Monday, because people tend not to want to release on Friday for obvious reasons, to start onboarding people from the beta whitelist into the app. So that's really exciting. We're really pumped for that. We're keen to get this product into the hands of customers so we can get some real feedback and actually start testing the hypothesis experiment that we have around this whole thing. On the design side, we've also spent time putting together our updated landing page. If you go on arcx.money now, you'll see that basically we still talk about passports and scores that aren't credit scores. So this is going to change quite dramatically. We're going to go and be quite forward on we are like all about capital efficient borrowing. It's the DeFi credit score and it's ArcX credit. And what we can do is we can offer you industry leading collateralization ratios on popular crypto assets like Ethereum. And so that change will basically coincide with the official launch of our closed beta program, which is where people can start to apply to join the waitlist. Over the next few months, we'll be gradually allowing people to start using the app. So from that waitlist, we'll be onboarding people gradually. But the point of doing this in this way is because we wanted to make sure that we're funding part of the liquidity pool. So we want to make sure that doesn't get oversubscribed. And we want to just gradually do it. And we want to test, we want to get feedback, and we want to make improvements in a lower risk setting. So that's basically the idea, but a lot more will be communicated kind of throughout. And if you flick to the next slide, this kind of tells us what's coming down the pipe. Like, as I said, beta testing and release preparation, this is really just the design and technical quality assurance work that's happening just ahead of the beta release. What we're going to market with, to be very explicit, is we're going to market with a DeFi credit score, a decentralized liquidity market, and improved capital efficiency with dynamic loan terms. And why it's valuable is that it's a step change improvement in what's been going on in DeFi lending markets for the last 2-3 years, and it's even more of a step change when you compare it to some of the projects that have been speaking quite loudly over in the last couple of weeks about credit scores. So we think that what we've built is truly unique. It's actually quite innovative, and from a business model perspective, quite disruptive, because from a time when there'll be a time when none of these protocols like Aave, Maker, and so on will treat users the same. They'll treat them as individuals who have behaviors that exhibit positive credit worthiness or maybe like a risk profile that's like lower or higher than others, and then as based on that, like offer specific terms. So this is, I think, the start of like a movement around the way that this business typically works. And so we're really excited about being kind of like first to market with that combination of a credit score and a borrowing protocol that uses that credit score. So yeah, as I was saying, the main objective is to get to that landing page. So to get to that beta release, and then beyond that, we're going to be developing our landing page, and then aside from that, also putting together some minimum viable product risk dashboards that surface key metrics for people to understand the system risk and performance. I think this is really critical, and this will be also an evolution. So starting with this MVP, we'll work towards something kind of like a public risk dashboard, maybe hosted on like a June Analytics or something like that. So that's what's coming up from the team's perspective next. And I think if we flip to the next slide, we've got like a little section with Dr. Stuart Watt. So okay. Is that all good? Does anyone have any questions from the community, by the way? Or Corey, I know you're on the call, so maybe I'll just see if you had any questions.
Oh, no, I'm pretty good,
Sweet. Okay. That's good. So, right, this section, what we're going to do is we're going to bring on our fantastic Dr. Stuart Watt to talk about the credit score. So, for those who don't know Stuart, he basically he's like the risk, like he's like the focus of the whole team around like the whole risk, the credit scoring, and any calculations that require like a PhD essentially. So I think it's actually really good that we're bringing him on so that we can talk about a lot of these things. So I've got some questions, and maybe to kick it off, I would just ask, what does the DeFi credit score measure, and what can it be used for?
Yep, no worries. So yeah, hello everyone. It's the first community chat, so good to be here. What is the DeFi credit score and what does it measure? DeFi credit score basically is a grade of your on-chain DeFi borrowing experience. So what we do is we look at your past experience in holding debt and collateral and borrowing responsibly, and we grade you on how well you manage your positions over time. And then using that grade, if you've shown that you can, responsibly handle debt without being liquidated and manage your positions across a variety of market conditions, if you can show us that and we give you a good credit score, then that'll unlock more benefits on the ArcX platform. So that's basically, high level what the credit score is.
Amazing. And okay, so talk to us about like the design of the credit score. What were the things that we intentionally designed for? Like, what were the problems that we were trying to solve? And yeah, how did you think about the tension that probably arises between the experience of actually having a credit score and building it versus the sort of need to have like a system that functions with like financial viability in mind?
Okay, so that's a big question. So I'll start by just talking about like how the credit score is designed and what it takes into account. So the majority of the credit score takes into account your ArcX lending behavior. So as you borrow with ArcX and you manage your position, if you do that responsibly over an extended period of time, your credit score will go up. And that ArcX lending history forms the majority of your credit score. Now, we also take into account, DeFi lending has been around for a number of years, and a lot of our users or potential users may be coming from a rich background of DeFi lending. So we also want to acknowledge that if you've been borrowing on Compound or Maker, then you've already shown, and there's data there to show that you're actually already a good borrower, and you shouldn't be starting from zero. So Most of the credit score is built from ArcX borrowing data. And so you start borrowing with ArcX, and provided you're borrowing responsibly and you're maintaining a safe position and not getting liquidated, you will see your credit score going up. But there's also a small component of the credit score which takes into account your borrowing history on other lending platforms like Compound Finance and Maker. So the main thing we look at when we're looking at your historical borrowing behavior on these other platforms, these third-party platforms, is we're looking at whether or not you were liquidated. So what we're trying to avoid with our ArcX lending platform is we're trying to avoid the case where your positions become under-collateralized and they're subject to liquidation, and that can possibly lead to what we call toxic debt. And just generally, it's not a great outcome if people have positions which are under-collateralized. It's bad for borrowers, it's bad for lenders. So what we want to do is avoid that situation. And so what we're looking for on these third-party platforms is we're looking at whether or not your address has been liquidated before. And that's the main piece of information we're looking for. And what we do is we consider your liquidations or lack of liquidations across your borrowing history, across a variety of different market conditions. So, for example, if you were liquidated, ETH, for example, and heaps of people are being liquidated on Compound, if you managed to avoid that because you were proactive, you managed a safe position, and you avoided liquidation when many other of your fellow borrowers didn't, then that's a good sign to us that you're actually a responsible borrower, and your credit score will reflect that. So that's the other part of the credit score. So those two components, the ArcX borrowing history and your third-party borrowing history, they combine together to give your DeFi credit score. Now, there's an additional component to all of this, which is if you become liquidated using our platform. Now, this is a highly undesirable outcome, and we hope we've designed a system that should prevent that from happening. But if it does, there's a penalty to your credit score because of that. So that's the design of the credit score. So
Amazing. Okay. And then so how did it'd be really helpful to talk about the earlier iterations of the credit score, and what were the learnings that we had along the way, specifically with respect to from a risk perspective, but also from a user experience perspective.
Yeah, so touching on the user experience perspective, we found that having a credit score which is highly transparent was very important. As a user, you should know exactly why your credit score is the number it is. So initially, when we started working on the credit score, we built a highly complex and advanced machine learning model, which takes in a variety of different on-chain pieces of information. And this machine learning model would basically predict the likelihood that you're going to liquidate in the future. However, when we had this model, what we found was that it wasn't very transparent. It was a bit of a black box as to how it actually calculated your credit score, and we weren't able to communicate very well to a user why their credit score was the way that it was. And that was sort of undesirable, and we decided to move away from that machine learning approach and move to a more heuristic approach. And that's the current credit score that we have now. So we have a set of rules which are very clear how your credit score is calculated, and it's very clear to the user how you can manage your position in order to maximize your credit score. And we figured that there's so much sort of vagueness in DeFi already. It's what we really want is a transparent credit score that everyone can understand and everyone can get the most use out of. So that's from the user experience side of things. From the risk side of things, there's a lot of different factors that come into play when thinking about risk and credit. And we wanted a credit score which basically gave the user as much of the benefits of having that maximized capital efficiency as possible while minimizing as much risk as possible. So the credit score is actually designed in order to sort of encourage a user to borrow in a certain way to get the benefits of a higher capital efficiency without bringing unnecessary risk to the protocol. So one of the largest components of the credit score when looking at your ArcX borrowing history is how much of your available credit you borrowed. And if you're borrowing right up to your limit, then even just a small, crash in your collateral value to a liquidation. And so we deem that to be quite risky behavior. And what we're trying to encourage is people to borrow at a reasonable value of their maximum credit. So we call it a loan to limit. And what we suggest is that you should sit at about 60%. 60 to 70% is optimal in order to minimize your risk of being liquidated in a sudden market crash. So the credit score is designed in order to reward users who sit in that optimal 60 to 70% LTL loan to limit range. And the users who do that, they significantly lower their risk of being liquidated. They significantly lower the risk to the protocol that can come from toxic debt arising from liquidations. And those users will grow their credit score the fastest. So users who sit at a high loan to limit, they will not be growing their credit score as fast. It's deemed to be risky behavior. And so they won't reach those higher capital efficiencies, which are inherently more risky to the protocol. So it's kind of a feedback loop where borrowing at a lower LTL makes your position safer, which allows you to get a higher credit score, which allows you to unlock higher capital efficiency. But because you're borrowing at that lower LTL, borrowing at that higher capital efficiency doesn't lead to higher risk for you or for the protocol. And so it's sort of a best of both worlds for the borrower and for ArcX.
So I think we had a question from Corey. Corey, feel free to go off mute and ask it.
Sick. I was kind of more just interested in the interoperability of the score and how you can basically take one wallet from another wallet, and can you use your score? I know you've done all this hard work, all this sort of stuff. Seems really complicated, and I'm actually dumb, so forgive me for not understanding it. But the real question is can I take this with me wherever I go, basically?
At the moment, the DeFi credit score is being used purely for ArcX credit. But at this stage, it's purely a tool for unlocking higher capital efficiency on our platform. Does that answer your question?
Does my ArcX score kind of go with me forever, if that makes sense?
Provided,
can I do I have to, if I swap wallets and stuff like that or whatnot, or
at the moment we haven't implemented a system to associate wallets. That's definitely coming in the future, where we can ask if you would like. It's up to you. If you would like to associate wallets, then we can transition that borrowing history and across that association. However, if you just spin up a completely new wallet, we have no idea who you are, then you'll be starting from scratch. However, if you can verify that this new address of yours is associated with your original one, then we can link your credit score together. Basically, link the borrowing behavior and your lending history across those two wallets as if they were a single identity.
Sweet,
that's something
cool.
That's coming down the funnel.
That's sick.
If you were to, let's say you've been borrowing on Compound or Maker maybe, if you take that wallet and you come over to ArcX and start borrowing, certainly we'll be able to track that, and you'll be starting with a higher credit score because we've been able to look at your borrowing history, unless you were liquidated a whole bunch of times. However, if you want to start borrowing with ArcX and you have a completely fresh wallet, then at the moment, if we have no data on you, then you'll be starting from scratch with everyone else.
Awesome.
But certainly down the track, if you want to start borrowing across a variety of different wallets, we'll have a system that can associate those, and that's could be an opt-in system where you provide those wallets and that association, and we'll be able to create a credit score which links all of them together as a single
Sweet.
identity.
Could it also like then you use like I guess the length or history of having multiple wallets kind of synced up? If you can prove on chain that you've been on chain for longer, could that also be a way of boosting the score? Like just out of curiosity,
that's actually
if you're provably older or more experienced, if that makes sense. I don't know.
in a sense, kind of. So part of the credit score actually does look at something similar to that. So the longer you have been borrowing on Compound or Maker, the longer you've been borrowing without liquidation, the higher your credit score will be.
Sweet. That's cool.
Not necessarily the age of your account. If you've never had any borrowing history, it doesn't really matter if your account is 2 years old at this point or 2 weeks old. If you've never borrowed before, we have no gauge of whether or not you're a responsible borrower. However, if you have got DeFi borrowing history, then the longer that history is, the higher your credit score will be.
Yeah, that's sick. Because I do like the idea of having, because like currently there's like no real reason not to just spin up a new wallet or not to kind of have your wallets kind of interacting in a way. You're actually incentivized to not have them interact, but then it would be kind of nicer for the ecosystem, I guess, kind of more healthier to see more healthy actors going forward if they're kind of like incentivized in a way, like at the back of their mind, knowing that, you know, my actions are kind of like, I need to be responsible for them type mentality. But yeah, no, that's sick. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of our value propositions is that the benefit of a higher capital efficiency will encourage users to want to link their wallets because they'll be able to carry that credit score that they've worked hard to build onto additional accounts. So we're hoping that the benefit of having a high credit score is worth it. That'll actually encourage people to not just spin up a brand new wallet and start from scratch. They'll prefer to associate their wallets because they get the additional benefit that they've already worked towards.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, and just to add in here, one thing that's really cool is that if you have the same address across different chains and different lending borrowing protocols, as we start indexing more protocols, it's like more history gets seen by the system across every chain, across every protocol. So there's this really cool property. As long as you just do the thing on chain, it will be picked up eventually as we index more and more of the chain. And I think as that incentive to like have more good activity around a single wallet increases, you're going to be able to start assigning almost what we call like reputational value quantified in some sort of dollar term to wallets that will lead to some really interesting things. So yeah, we're really excited about it, and mainly because this is going to be the first credit score that actually has value behind it. Like there's a lot of credit scores out there that will give you a backtested result and say, look, we can perfectly predict in the past how accurately we would have predicted you getting liquidated, but nothing actually stands behind what it's created. So that's, I think, going to be that key thing about the Archix credit score, the fact that we have skin in the game, quite literally.
So something like that's you know, what we're like value from a value proposition perspective, like why you'd want to use this system is so that you can unlock capital efficiency. That's our strongest hypothesis. And there's a whole load of other features that we're building that will, I think, create like the best borrowing experience and the safest borrowing experience in DeFi. But you know, with that promise, what that means is that it introduces more risk into the system, particularly as users who say get to a 999 credit score. What that will unlock for that user is, you know, in our case, it could be like 100% LTV loans on Ethereum. So with that offer, what it means is that when you factor in the time a liquidator takes to recognize the liquidation, execute, and potentially like a falling price of collateral, say if ETH just drops off a cliff, that means that it introduces this like a greater chance of toxic debt into the system. So I wanted to just ask Stuart, like, how did you think about profit from the perspective of the user, but also at the system-wide level? Like, what did that entail?
Yeah, so thinking about profit from an individual user. So if we take the example of, say, Compound and one of their pools, for example, ETH, I think they have a max LTV of, say, 80% or maybe 85%. And that sets a pretty large buffer between the point at which their debt is larger than their collateral in terms of value. And so ETH can be crashing pretty hard, but there's still quite a large buffer before that user will actually become liquidated. And that buffer essentially means that any liquidations occurring, or most liquidations occurring for that user who crosses that maximum LTV, it'll never really lead to toxic debt. However, the closer you set your maximum LTV to 100%, the higher probability there is that, the price of the collateral will crash fast enough and we won't be able to liquidate their position fast enough such that, the value of the debt will exceed their collateral. And so by the time we liquidate them, we're actually making a loss. So what we want to do is we want to offer 100% LTV loans, one-to-one loans. However, someone sitting at that actual level of one-to-one loans is relatively risky to the protocol. So the way that we get around this, and thinking about this on a per user basis, unfortunately, offering those better capital efficiencies does lead to higher risk. So for an individual user who grows their score to, say, 999 and unlocks that one-to-one loan, if they get liquidated, they will lead to a toxic debt. However, the way that the credit score is structured is that in order to get to that position where you can possibly cause a loss to the protocol and a loss to yourself, you would have to have borrowed optimally for a number of months before you can even get to that point. And the whole purpose of the credit score is it sort of weeds out the users who would ever expose themselves and expose ArcX to those conditions. The credit score sort of filters them out. That's the whole idea. So on a per user basis, there is the chance that a user could grow their credit score perfectly by being an absolute perfect borrower, and then suddenly decide that they no longer want to be a perfect borrower and take a very risky position. They'll get liquidated, and that'll lead to some amount of toxic debt to the protocol. However, what we hypothesize is that across the whole population of borrowers, where you have a whole spread of different credit scores into a spread of maximum LTVs from, say, 80% all the way up to 100%, if we make the assumption that in a market crash, an even distribution of those addresses will be liquidated, then the profits and revenue from liquidations of users with a lower credit score will greatly outnumber the few of the users who have that very top credit score who are getting liquidated and leading to toxic debt. So what we have, as opposed to conventional DeFi lending like Compound, where they have opted for complete risk-free on a per user basis, so each user will never lead to toxic debt, we're moving to a system where we can offer better capital efficiency. That does lead to risk on a user basis, so we can expect a tiny bit of loss and a very small probability. However, across the broad system, across all our users, that should never happen, because we've built a credit score in such a way that the users who are likely to be liquidated won't have the credit score required in order to lead us to toxic debt. So in aggregate, we have built effectively a risk-free system that still offers that high capital efficiency of a one-to-one loan.
And by risk-free, you mean not risk-free, and very important that we mention that. No, I'm just joking.
But risk-free means very, very, very low likelihood of loss.
Thank you for that. This is a risk-free system completely. Nothing could ever go wrong.
Kermit, do we have like a couple more minutes? We can ask, talk about like what's coming down the pipe in terms of risk.
Yeah, I think my 2 minutes real quick because we have the narrative alpha that I want to get through as well.
Yeah.
But 2 minutes, I'll pass over to you, whatever you want to cover in that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I can just ask Stuart, like, just an easy one. Like, what's the immediate focus for like the risk team over the next month? You know, as we think about like new features or new capabilities, as well as like the BAU or business as usual processes that need to happen when we start going live. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we're working from a risk and data perspective. One of them is, as part of the offering of the ArcX lending platform, we want to provide users with a very tailored borrowing experience. So one of the things that we're going to be building is a unique credit report that each borrower can access, and it gives them a full breakdown of their position health, their borrowing positions on a variety of third-party platforms, and really just a breakdown of how their credit score is calculated so that the user knows exactly how we're taking their on-chain data and calculating their credit score and what that means in terms of the safety of their positions. So that's one thing that we're looking at. And another big focus for us is moving away. We've done a lot of thinking about borrowers and how to build a system that's safe for borrowers, that's safe for the lending, and a system that builds a credit score which borrowers can interact with. And now we need to start thinking about the other side of this whole equation, which is the lenders. So we require people to come and deposit their funds, and we need to start thinking about setting in dynamic interest rates to encourage lenders to deposit into the pools. That's something that's on the plate to do.
Amazing. Okay, well, that I'm going to hand back over to Kerman and the rest of the team.
Cool.
Thanks.
Let's jump in it. Thank you for that, Stuart. That was amazing. We're going to be definitely hearing more from you. I think in a month from now is when it's in your time zone. So by then we'll have a lot more interesting data to talk about and maybe have questions about. Sweet. Let's jump into it. So this week wanted to chat a bit around MakerDAO and doing a deep dive as to what's going on here. So for those of you that don't know, Maker is at a point where it's pretty successful. It has close to a $10 billion DAI float and has survived a few cycles, especially this one. But there's now starting some like existential questions starting to form around it. And a lot of it really comes down to like how decentralized should it be versus how efficient should it be at running. And these questions kind of permeate throughout its governance structure, its value capture, and effectively like how it thinks about growth as a whole. So some of the really interesting things I found about this is that Maker governance, Maker token holders currently basically control everything. They control the vision, they control the strategy, and they control the tactics of the DAO, which means that it moves really slowly, which is good to be robust, but at the same time, it means it can't really keep up with what's going on in the market. And I think it's really interesting as the DAO grows of like how it thinks about those trade-offs, because as we'll kind of jump into a few slides, we're seeing some interesting like competition vectors forming for Maker. So what is going on right now? There's one proposal by, I think it's Hasu, to basically have a structure where you have the token holders only kind of voting or being accountable at the highest level of decision making, which is that ultra long term, that bird's eye view, and those like really key decisions. And then you have like more different sets of stakeholders that manage more day to day and the more tactical stuff. So I thought this was really interesting because Maker is probably the most successful DAO in the space, despite the problems it has. It's actually decentralized, not run by anyone, and it has these core units running it, but it's also kind of running into issues. So just kind of tracking how they're thinking about their strategy, I think, is going to be an important thing for everyone to watch, because I think in the next 2 to 4 years, when we have more DAOs mature, they're all going to be facing similar issues. So it's we're lucky to have Maker kind of show us some lessons in advance. So on one aspect, there's the whole governance structure debate of how Maker should be run and organized. But the other bit is how Maker scales. So recently, they voted to allocate 500 million DAI to an investment strategy composed of treasury bonds, effectively. And to me, I think it's really fantastic that we have this scale of growth coming to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. But at the same time, it also raises questions of, as there are more off-chain agreements spawning, we don't have that full transparency and auditability that we used to have in DeFi. So I think at a high level, it makes sense, but I'm personally not sure if this is the way that DeFi should scale. And I'd actually be keen to probably open up the floor and kind of get what everyone else thinks about real world assets in Maker. Anyone?
Do we think that RWA will become a meme?
I personally think so, but it's also hard to debate against it because everything is fine until it isn't. Like, I kind of look at a lot of this as similar to what happened with 3 hours. Of course, not in the same fashion. Maker governance is way more well thought out and structured, but what happens off chain takes a while to propagate on chain, and then it has consequences. So we'll have to see, but so far it feels like there's a lot of energy in the space to bring more real world assets, real world identities on chain. My personal belief is that everything on chain is the source of truth and everything should derive from that, but we'll see in time how feasible that thesis is.
What about like land, like hard land, stuff like that? Because we think a lot about like what currencies would be backed by like gold and like Bitcoin and shit like that. But I think hard land as a real world asset on chain could then spark for something to be backed by like land. I don't know. I think that's probably a big bull case for something like that.
Yeah, the question is, how do you enforce the rights of the land in a programmatic way, and then how do you price the land in a non-manipulated way? And like when you have basically a housing bear market, it's like the houses are falling across the board, but you don't actually have a price article of what the price of the land is until you try to sell it. So that's a bit that I find hard about land. It's a very subjective valuation.
I think, like livestock, like cattle property and stuff like that, is pretty stable in terms of cost. And then
it probably depends as well on like what type of, is it a derivative or are you literally holding the title? Like the land titles of, offices around the world control kind of the association between like a human being and like an ownership of like a plot of land. But then you have REITs, right? Real estate investment trusts, which abstract away all of that ownership so you can essentially buy like a piece or a share of a portfolio of land. Maybe that could be put on chain, but yeah, so there's probably derivatives that can be fed in, but obviously there's a lot of legal things that could potentially get in the way.
Yeah, it's gonna be really cool to see. I think everyone thinks it's the next way to really scale the space in terms of like the capital and assets we can bring on chain, but it feels like the path isn't as obvious as people make it out to be, or that we think it is at this point in time. Cool. The other really interesting bit I find is the Maker token model. It's like when you look at DAI float, it's grown exponentially. And you look at the Maker price, it's kind of a completely different graph. And I think we're seeing this divergence increasingly across DeFi. where you have a product that's growing and doing well, but then like there's always like a disconnect in the token. I think Uni is going through a lot of this right now with the switch hasn't been flipped, so effectively Uni holders earn none of the fees generated through the platform. So I think this is like a big issue that Maker is going to have to tackle eventually, but it's far more complicated given there's also a lot of like securities and regulatory stuff associated with like token models and value capture. And on this point of like efficiency versus decentralization, it's really fascinating. So apparently Maker has a thing called the D3M module, or the D3 module, where they supply liquidity directly to Aave to maintain DAI interest rates. And over the past few weeks, we actually had Aave announce their stablecoin. So it's really similar in the fact that Aave stablecoin will mint real-world assets, use volatile collateral, interestingly, even credit scoring, treasury-backed assets, and algorithmic strategies, I think. So it feels like this is Aave's direct competitor to DAI, and it's going to force Maker to get more efficient, because if Aave stablecoin starts picking up, a lot of these questions are going to become an existential threat for Maker. But Maker is a huge lead on Aave at the moment, given how deeply integrated DAI is, but we also know the space changes fast. So all that to say is, I think some of the issues we're seeing summarized, and I think that I'm going to be thinking about a lot, is how do you balance agility to execute, transparency around decision making, and then also like measuring performance within a DAO. This is something that I think Maker is struggling with right now, even when it comes to like how effective a core unit is and how much it costs in the DAO. The second is like how we think about moving more real world assets on chain with off chain agreements replicated and priced. And then the last one is around like how value is created versus how it's actualized in some sort of like entity. So as we can see, the MKR token doesn't reflect the success of the DAI float growing in the fees captured. So it's I think these are going to be some of the issues that we all collectively figure out as an industry over the next, say, year or two. But it's going to be really cool when we solve these, because I think these are some of the most pressing issues for DAOs and to really push the space forward. And yeah, that's kind of it for this week's Narrative Alpha. Keen to open up the floor for a few minutes, and then we'll finish off with community stuff.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
So under one, no performance measurement. What do you think is like the key kind of missing piece there for measuring performance in DAOs?
Yeah, I think it's hard to measure performance, but rather there should be clear responsibilities and outcomes where if they're violated, there's some decision maker that has the ability to really poke a hole and see whether it holds up. Right now, the problem with Maker is that in order for, say, a non-performing unit that's clearly not performing to be ousted, it takes a collective decision, and a lot of those people are friends of people in the unit as well. So you have a lack of responsibility and a lot of incentives not to kind of kick out or like disband in a low performing unit. So I think it's less about measuring metrics, but making sure there's a clear process or method that can execute on like making sure there's no inefficiencies in the system, or as little as possible. Sweet. Well, let's move on to the community section. Joel, over to you.
Cool. So I'll just do a quick summary of the GM leaderboard. I think the main takeaway for the last couple of weeks is Kyle has actually lost his streak. So unlucky Kyle, you'll have to catch back up. Apart from that, though, everyone's increased in their scores. And now I'll move on to the next slide. So yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Cheeky Bits for just being really engaged with the community. I've seen he's a new face, so we just welcome him as well. It's great to see you just asking questions, getting more involved and stuff. We really like to see that. So now I'll pass it over to the man himself. Corey, if you're up for it, for the words from the Pope.
Thanks, guys. A real honor to be here again with you all, spending my time. I love it. Words from the Pope. 158. I had visions of a Web3 social network powered by ArcX, Kerman, alongside the greats like Zuckerberger and Elon Musk. The haters crying because ArcX is now trading at $5,000 and you could have owned a country. Amen. I guess it goes without saying that if you buy ArcX at these prices, you're literally securing your children's planets. Amen.
I love it. Thank you, Corey. Great as
Amen.
always.
Amen.
Can't stand for the validity of the statements, and that isn't financial advice or to be taken in any way.
I'm not affiliated with ArcX.
Yeah, but no, thank you for that, Corey, and thank you to everyone who joined in. We'll end the stream here, but I'll still be hanging around.